I doing here? This is the question that Joan is asking herself, 15 years into her unhappy marriage. What am I doing here? Why am I with this person? Why am I wasting my time with someone who does not and cannot make me happy? For a lot of unhappy couples, the answer to this question is, well, things didn't start out this way. Things started off well, and then they sort of took a turn for the worse. But that's not the case for Joan. Joan has known for a long time that the person she's with is not the right person for her. She knew this 1 year into her marriage, 5 years into her marriage. In fact, if Joan is honest with herself, she knew on her wedding day that she was making a mistake. And now those nagging doubts have turned into full-fledged misery, and yet she's still here because she just doesn't have the heart to call it quits. In my research, I study how people make crucial decisions about their relationships. Decisions like whether to go on that first coffee date with someone, whether the person you're currently with is the person you should spend the rest of your life with, or if there are problems in your relationship, whether these problems are worth breaking up over. As you might imagine, people care a great deal about these kinds of decisions. In fact, recent research has shown that of all the things we regret in life, romantic relationships are our #1 source of life regrets. And this makes sense because relationships have a profound influence on our health and well-being. People in happy, healthy relationships tend to be less stressed, they're less depressed, they have lower blood pressure, and they're just generally more satisfied with their lives on the whole compared to people in relationships that are less fulfilling. So it makes sense to try to make good decisions about our relationships. So why has Joan failed to make good decisions about her relationship? Well, it could be that Joan just doesn't think there are any better partners out there for her. Maybe she thinks this is as good as it gets. And indeed, research shows that if you have poor alternatives to your current partner, you're more likely to stay in an unfulfilling relationship. Or maybe Joan just didn't figure out that this relationship wasn't working for her until she'd already put considerable time and energy into the relationship, and she didn't want to waste all those resources. And again, research shows the more invested you are, the more likely you are to stay in an unfulfilling relationship. But there's another possibility, one that researchers have consistently overlooked, which is that maybe Joan isn't staying in this relationship for herself. Maybe Joan is staying in this relationship for her partner. Maybe Joan's partner is just so dedicated to this relationship that she just doesn't have the heart to turn him down, to call it off. Maybe the whole reason they got engaged was because she just couldn't say no to his grand romantic proposal. Maybe leading up to the wedding, she was thinking about calling it off, but she knew that doing that would just break his heart and she just couldn't do it. So she stuck it out, rationalizing that things weren't that bad and they'd get better. And now 15 years later, things have only gotten worse and she's stuck here wondering, what am I doing here? It has become convenient with our current economic system for us to think about ourselves as consumers, as people who are restlessly, endlessly driven toward the maximization of self-interest. And unfortunately, this consumer narrative has not been constrained just to goods and services. It has spilled over to more interpersonal domains, such as romantic relationships. When it comes to dating, we have come to see ourselves as consumers of people, assuming that the relationship decisions we make are all about self-interest, all about seeking out our own needs and interests. And this is particularly clear in the context of online dating. If you think about it, online dating is really not that different from online shopping. We basically shop for a potential mate. My job as an online dater is to showcase my attributes in the best possible light, my personality, my appearance, and so on, and try to figure out what's the best deal I can get for these traits vis-a-vis your traits. It's a consumer mindset. It's a transaction. What is the highest quality mate I can get in exchange for myself? And this is lauded as ideal decision-making. We should all be these rational agents trying to figure out our own preferences so we can make the choices that are best for us. But is this really how we make decisions about something as personal as romantic relationships? My research suggests that it's not, that we're actually a whole lot more pro-social than this. On some level, we do realize that the decisions we make about relationships affect other people, and we care about those people. We care about their needs, their perspectives, their well-being, and these concerns affect our decisions in very real ways, even if we don't expect or want them to. So, coming back to the online dating example, say that you are an online dater, and you're scrolling through Match.com or OkCupid, and you come across a profile with a photo that leaves you feeling unenthused. So you skip over it, because you're not attracted to this person. But it turns out that they've also seen your profile, and they're very interested in dating you. And they send you a friendly message. You seem awesome. Would you like to have coffee next week? And now you have to decide whether to accept or reject this offer, so what do? Well, we just established that you're not interested in this person, so the decision should be easy. You just turn them down. When someone asks you out who you're not interested in, you say no. And that's exactly what my participants said. So I ran a study where, in one condition, I asked people, I said, here's a dating profile. I paired it with an unattractive photo. And I said, if this person were here in the lab and they were interested in you, would you agree to go on a date with them? And 84% of people said no, I would not. I would turn that date down. But here's the thing, I also had a condition where I made people believe that this situation was real. So again, I showed them the dating profile with the unattractive photo, but this time I said, this person's here, they're in the lab, they've seen your profile, they're interested in you, what do you want to do? And in this context, only 63% of people said that they would reject the person. So people were more likely to agree to the date that they didn't want in reality than people expected they would hypothetically. When I further compared these two groups, I found that people in the real condition who thought that they were up against a real-life person felt pretty bad about hurting that person's feelings. They didn't want to turn them down and reject them and make them feel bad, and that helps to explain why rejecting someone is harder to do than we actually think it is. So maybe now we're a little bit closer to understanding how Joan wound up in this situation. Maybe she wasn't overly thrilled about her partner even from the beginning, but he seemed sweet and interested in her, and she didn't want to hurt his feelings, so she humored him to a first date. Coffee, maybe dinner and a movie. But then the question becomes, okay, but why did she also agree to a second date, and a third date, and a fourth date, and a 10th date? Once she realized that this relationship wasn't working for her, why didn't she call it off before things got too serious? And that's what my colleagues and I wanted to find out next. What motivates people to stay in dating relationships that don't make them happy? So, to find out, we recruited 1,200 people who were currently dating someone, and we asked them a lot of questions, but most importantly, we asked them, overall, how distressing do you think it would be for your partner if this relationship were to end? In other words, how awful would a breakup be for your partner? And then we followed them up over the next 3 months to see who would break up with their partners and who would stick it out. What we found was that people were less likely to break up with their partners if they thought that doing so would greatly distress their partners. So people who thought that their partner would handle a breakup reasonably well were about 40% likely to break up with them over the course of my study. But people who thought that a breakup would just devastate their partners were only 20% likely to break up with them over the course of the study. Now you might think, well, maybe that's because the people who thought that their partners would be upset were the same people who were really happy in their relationships. They liked their relationships, and so they were really staying for self-interested reasons. But we actually found that this wasn't the case. So we measured things like how satisfied people were, how committed they felt to their relationships, how appreciated they felt by their partners, and even people who weren't that satisfied, weren't that committed, felt taken for granted by their partners, they still showed this effect. In other words, people were staying in relatively unfulfilling relationships for the sake of their partners. Okay, you might think, well, maybe there were other reasons, structural reasons why they were staying. Maybe they were married or they had kids. But it turns out this wasn't the case either. The vast majority of these participants weren't married and didn't have kids. They were a relatively young dating sample. So it seems more and more that really they were just staying for their partners. Okay, you might think, well, maybe some of these people were just really, really nice, right? There's like a subset of this sample who's just particularly kind or altruistic, and they're the ones driving the effect. Wrong again. We also measured how generally motivated people are to meet their partner's needs, and even relatively selfish people, people who said that they're generally not that concerned about meeting their partner's needs. They still showed this effect. Granted, it was weaker, but it was still there and it was still significant. I think that taken together, what this research shows is that we're really not the rational, self-interested decision makers we like to think we are. We actually care a great deal about other people's needs. And so even when we're making a major decision, a potentially life-changing decision, like whether to break up with someone, we consider our partner's needs and we factor those in. We need to stop ignoring this source of influence on our decision making. It makes no sense to pretend that we just don't care or shouldn't care about other people's needs, because clearly we do care. We inherently, fundamentally care. And when we pretend that we don't, we're just robbing ourselves of self-knowledge. We're hurting our ability to predict our own behavior. If we continue to assume that we're these rational, self-interested beings, we're going to continue to be baffled and confused by our own decisions. And this is a problem because these really don't seem like good decisions. They're definitely not good decisions from a self-interested perspective. We're going on dates with people we're not actually interested in. We're staying in relationships that don't make us happy. From a self-interested perspective, these are terrible decisions. But even from a pro-social perspective, these decisions still don't really make sense. I mean, think about it from the partner's perspective. Would you really want someone to go on a date with you when they weren't actually interested in you and they were just humoring you? Would you really want someone to stay in a relationship with you that wasn't making them happy and they were just with you out of compassion? Probably not. Because we want and deserve partners who genuinely want to be with us. Once we get on board with just how pro-social we actually are, we can start to critically reflect on these decisions and think about what's actually in the partner's best interest here. What's really the pro-social thing to do? Don't let your partner convince you, or don't let consumer culture convince you that you're just out for yourself, that the relationship choices you make are all about you. Because the pro-social part of you has other plans, and you want to be plugged into that. Otherwise, you might find yourself 15 or 20 years from now thinking, what am I doing here?